And then there's myself also as somebody who runs a professional doctorate, which is empirically research led. So, and I'm thinking about what this means across all those, at least those three different identities. And I think at the beginning, I came from a perspective that maybe there is something a bit different about the ethics of creative methods. But actually, I've come to the idea of actually, no, what we need to do is research better, full stop. So I've actually come more towards that way. And actually, I came out, this whole thing stemmed from the idea of when we bring creative methods to inquire into human phenomena, then we need to think really carefully about what we do, how we do it, how we make that stuff come into existence. That's only coming into existence because of what we're doing and what people are choosing to give to us, share to us, or gift to us. And from that is the other things you may find out, as I identified earlier, what else you might find out about people's lives that aren't directly related to that research purpose as well, and what you do with that kind of information. But actually, this is all about doing research with integrity, full stop. So I think I'm coming at it now from this idea of we need to rethink what ethics of doing research with integrity ought to be, and how we need to challenge the ethics of bureaucracy. And I think that's kind of where I'm pivoting around at the moment, and how I can make that fit across my three, at least those three identities I've just identified. So if anybody can tell me, great.
I was going to say, Jackie and Eric, have you got the answer?
That's on a postcard.
No, haven't got the answer. But I think there's a seed of something in there, isn't there? Around there's just so much going on, isn't there? So I actually think ethics processes are just failing to keep up with the way researchers are using research methods, and that they've inherited a sort of positivist attitude that is quite binary. The other observation I would make, and this really is anecdotal, I don't have any evidence for this, but I'm going to say it anyway. A lot of the speakers that we've had at the NTRM, the Non-Traditional Research Methods Network, tend to be researchers who are working in applied contexts, tend to be second career researchers. So they've either been teachers, nurses, or something else before they then do their doctorate, tend to be mature learners. And I think there's something in that which is about being grounded in practice, and I compare that to a lot of the kind of young early career researchers that come through some of the STEM subjects that I work with, that are very, very different in their approach. They learn a method, they apply a method, and that's what you do. So where am I going with all of this? I think your point about doing research better is really key, and it's just that ethics hasn't caught up with what many of us are trying to do. That's it.
I agree completely, Harriet. And I'm only thinking about my participants when some of them said that they'd engage and literally said, I'm doing this because I want to understand research. It wasn't necessarily I'm doing this because I want to be part of that I'm really interested in what you're exploring. It's literally I'm doing this because I want to understand. And I think that's the bit that where we're getting to, aren't we? It's what do we want to understand, and how can we best do that, and how can we do that ethically?
Can I just add to that?
Yeah, of course.
I think even the idea of coming up with a code of ethics for creative methods, I'm a little bit wary about. Why are we not putting the seeds and the processes that are already there and changing those from within? Just a thought.
No, I think you're right, and that comes down to the challenges we make. And I can't remember, I think maybe it was you, Harry, who said that having that conversation with the ethics panel. And I'm wondering, and I can see myself falling into this trap of this is my background is nurse, and I did ethics before I started doing this kind of work, healthcare ethics and medical ethics, so very different type of ethics. But I get annoyed at myself because I find myself falling into a trap of the bureaucracy of doing the ethics is annoying. But actually, I need to change that. I need to come up with an approach of how can I have a conversation about the ethics with the panel in order to understand more, and that's a take-home message I need to act on and think about how I can build that into practice.
Can I follow on from that?
Yeah, go for it, Emily.
Just really say, yeah, I think that's a really good point, because it's that there's like a real anonymity of an ethics board. They become this kind of other entity, and there's not necessarily a name. So when you email the ethics board, you're emailing the ethics board rather than even a person. And so my background is community engagement, and I guess as Harriet was kind of saying, I've come from a much more applied aspect and participatory research, and then now stepping into more academic space as a PhD student, I was like, what? Who is this and what is it? And it's easier to question because I've got the confidence of coming into it as a professional and knowing my area, but the complete naivety and like not knowing what's going on from it not being my space. And when I had to do my ethics for application, and I remember like my supervisors and different people being like, oh, you know, advising me, or just like almost being really careful, oh, don't rock the boat and don't ask for too much, and they might push you back. And I was like, well, so what if they do? Like, why is that a problem, and why can't I speak to them? And so I did. So I was like, you know, maybe they were like, oh, that's fine. But for me, I was like, is this okay? So I emailed and I was like, can I just speak to you? I emailed the ethics board. I was like, I don't know who you are, and I want to be able to have a conversation and see you. And I just asked to have a conversation, and they were fine with that. And now I've ended up like just out of my own partly interest and to see where I can push and negotiate things on as a kind of student representative on the ethics board there at the Warwick Medical School. And so this for me is really interesting, because these conversations think about how and where can I push things and try and make changes. And for me, that's about public involvement within those ethics boards. And so that's why, Helen, you're talking about the setting up that kind of community-based ethics, which is conversations that we've been having in community research for ages. I think it's really important and stuff I want to be part of. But yeah, I just think it's really important that we kind of are able to see it. And when people come as professionals, it's like, you know, like Jackie's like coming as a nurse or something, when you come out, as you come as a professional from a different space, you kind of can challenge it a bit easier. But I think it must be really hard for students that are coming through where they've just been trained to listen and trained to respect the certain authority and the certain knowledge processes to be able to challenge it. Yeah, so I know it's not really a question, it's kind of just more a reflection on what you guys are saying.
But it's a really valid reflection, and just before you said that, I was about to jump on and say that it almost feels like there is an adversarial element to the research ethics applications and a bit of a them and us, where we are indeed told to tread lightly, because otherwise there isn't necessarily that opportunity to have those discussions. Jackie?
I was just thinking about that notion, and I'll hand over a moment to Irene. I'm just thinking that notion of safeguarding that that Hills alluded to with medical ethics. Certainly from university ethics, I sit in on a research panel, and it was really useful, both like yourself, Emily, going there as a PhD student, doctoral student, and then taking on the role to monitor other people's ethics, which is really interesting. But yeah, and I think it's about how open are you prepared to be with the people that are submitting their work, and how rigorous is it, but against which and how for me it's all about fit. How does it fit the research? But there has to be constraints. Some I say have to, but is there some constraints around safeguarding? Certainly from a health perspective that I'm thinking.
Yeah. On that note, and we have touched and mentioned the safeguarding word. Irene, you had a question or a dilemma that you'd like to bring up, so we'll fit it in at this point, and then we can always circle back or forward regardless of depending on need. So by all means.
Right. This might be very off topic, but yeah, probably knowledge we'll cross-reference later on. So thank you for this very insightful workshop. And so I am a children's geographer doing creative methodology, and I think the most creative method that I've done was to ask children to create fictional cities. I'm just pasting my work here for everyone to see. Now I'm planning to apply the idea of speculation to ask children in a sinking city in Southeast Asia to imagine or envision their city in 100 years. So I'm thinking of a workshop called 100 Tomorrows to ask children, because some cities in Southeast Asia, they're sinking and they will be submerged underwater. And I'd like to ask children about their perspective about it. And but this is dystopic, and there might be some like ethical question when I ask children to imagine that their cities will be submerged underwater. So I feel that I do have some responsibilities there. But my goal there is to actually archive these visions and futurings of children to share with the next generation until it reaches 100 years generation for that intergenerational conversation. So what I'm thinking is to navigate this through is to fictionalize the imagination. So instead of imagining their sinking cities, I'll probably just make them or give them a prompt of imagine a city that will soon submerge into water. But children are smart, like they can know if I'm just trying to like redirect the attention to a fiction, but it's actually their city. So I just want to ask your thoughts about this kind of like speculative storytelling with children and the dystopic futures of the city. Thank you.
Harriet, you jumped on there very quickly.
Yeah, this is really interesting because I was actually having a conversation with one of the researchers here at Warwick about this same topic, but with a different group of participants. And the solution they came up with, because dystopia can leave one feeling hopeless and helpless. So the approach that this researcher has taken is to ask her participants to try and describe the ways that humans will adapt. So there's an assumption humans will adapt, right? We know that we might be past a point in climate change, particularly in that part of the world, to save some of these cities from sinking. So then the question is, how can you ensure, particularly in children, that they have a sense of agency about what's happening so that they develop confidence through that agency? And actually kids' imaginations, I'm sure, would be, would kind of be stimulated by that possibly. I don't know. It's just a suggestion.
Any of the other panel members want to contribute? Yes, Hilary?
Not something I've directly got experience with, but I know someone who did look at something similar, but in a community that had been submerged. And she went and spoke to persons who had been displaced because of that. So whether that would be helpful to you, I could certainly put you in touch with that person.
Yeah. Helen?
Thank you. I can't figure how to put my Teams hand up, so I hope my real hand will
It's
too.
okay. I'm looking at you.
Harry, I think another thing I support everything my colleagues have said, but just to come at this from a different angle. I think the imagination is generally undervalued in research, the potential of the imagination. And this is another hangover from the sort of post-Enlightenment positivism years, where imagination doesn't count. All that counts is what you can see and measure and count and all that kind of stuff. But with creative methods, obviously we're moving away from that. It's measuring and counting things is important. We're not saying it shouldn't happen or there's no value to it, but it's not the only way. And if you think about it, actually no research project can happen without imagination, because if we can't imagine doing research, we can't do research. Sometimes people say if you can see it, you can be it, and that's a real thing. But there's also a thing about if you can imagine it, you can probably do it, not necessarily, because sometimes we imagine things like whizzing around the world on spaceships that we can't necessarily do, but you get what I mean. So I think you could actually turn your privileging of imagination into a virtue rather than a vice. And I think there's enough literature around methods and imagination. There's a little chunk on my book on creative research methods on imagination with some references. There's enough people using imagination as part of their work in all sorts of different ways that I think you could really make a case for the virtue of that, and particularly with children, because children are very imaginative beings. They haven't had it beaten out of them by the bureaucracy of adulthood. So it makes a lot of sense to me, and I've done a lot of work with children and families. It makes a lot of sense to me that you would use a process stemming from imagination. And also there's so much been done around different kinds of speculative storytelling. I mean, in lockdown, Braun and Clark wanted to know about people's rule breaking or rule keeping in lockdown, and figured that just asking people what rules do you break probably wasn't going to get them great data. So they used story stems, which is a method from psychology where the researcher writes the very first few sentences of the story to set a scene, and then asks people to complete the story in whatever way they choose, and often gives them a bit of a steer. I think these researchers asked their writers to focus on the actions the character took and the consequences of those actions. So you can give a sort of very broad general steer, but after that, they left it completely up to the participants how they wrote, how long or short their stories were, how they constructed them, and all of that kind of thing. And that's just one example. So I think if you pick from different bits of the literature, you can make a really good case for using the method that you're putting forward in the context in which you're working.
Thank you so much.
Was that helpful, Irene?
Super helpful, just to think about like the imagination as a virtue rather than a vice, because actually I know a case of children suggesting to absorb floods instead of like putting some walls, and it's called the porous city, and it's now being like also applied by different people. So thank you so much.
No problem. It does, however, fairly loosely bring me back to briefly what we were talking about, but moving on, because we've talked a bit about safeguarding, we talked a bit about imagination and some limitations. So that would bring me nicely to the next question that people brought forward, which was, what are the key principles of a code of ethical practice for creative research? So what are some of the key things we need to think about if we were to, and I hate the word, but for this part here, codify what ethical practice should look like, or could look like, rather? Even if there's some really baseline ones, but what are some of the key things we need to think about? Hilary.
Yeah. You see, I'm challenging this idea of principles and codes now.
Yeah.
We're moving into the territory of values. What constitutes valuable, useful research? And I'm thinking a lot today about how it is we prioritize certain voices in constructions of usefulness or not usefulness. Thinking that in lines of the discussions in relation to power and power dynamics. But I'm actually thinking about this in relation to how from how research is being imagined and started from, through to how it's being designed, how it's being conducted, analysed, that dissemination, and then what happens when it's, you know, it's on its own way into life and going into places that we've never imagined before. So I'm thinking it's very much about understanding what this term value means, and what this term value means in relation to different parts of research, but also in relation to how it is we bring research into being.
Harriet.
Yeah, as soon as Hilary said values, it made me think part of the problem is that the moment you develop a set of principles, you disconnect it from context and from practice. So I almost wonder whether we really need to rethink that word principles and think about practices and values in creative research.
you
know. Helen or Jackie?
I'm not sure there's a very firm line between principles and values, but I get what you're saying. And I think that codification is a kind of goes along with bureaucracy and neoliberalism and all those things that we really don't want to do or be part of or have to deal with ever, even though we do have to. And so perhaps I'm trying to imagine an ideal code of research ethics. I'm struggling with it a bit, but I'm having a go. Having just espoused the virtues of imagination, I felt like I should make some use of my own. And I think these are initial thoughts, of course, because we only really started talking about this today or very recently anyway. But I wonder if there's something about the trust values that they kept coming up with: respect, honesty, fairness, and care. That people worldwide want researchers to practice in those ways. Whether we use that as a starting point, given that that's work that's already been done and it's empirical, and so might have some utility. I think I'm seeing an increasing move towards a value-based approach. I think one way that's potentially useful is if we're working with people from different disciplines, different backgrounds, different professions, if you sit down and figure out a set of values that you can all subscribe to and write it down. And that's a sort of codification, but it's per research project, per research team. It's not a sort of for all time thing. Then you've got something you can go back to if you've hit sticky situations, and that can be really, really useful. And I certainly think a value-based approach has much more worth than virtue ethics, which I think the principle of virtue ethics is if you're a good person, then your research will be ethical. Which I think is complete rubbish, because we all know good people who've done bad things. Some of us are those good people who've done bad things. We all know bad people who've done good things. It's not as simple as if you're a good person, you will do good things. We have I'm sure each of us could give an example of something we've done with the absolute best of intentions that has fallen completely flat on its face and gone horribly wrong. I know I could. I bet you all could. So for me, virtue ethics isn't really a goer, but value-based ethic and a value-based ethical approach really might be.
I think I would agree to that. Hilary.
Yeah, I'm thinking, because this is just making me think of value-based medicine, value-based nursing, or value-based health profession practitioner activity. But in line with this, it's the understanding where the community element of what we're doing is. So it's making me think of communitarian type ethics as well, which is what that video hinted to as well. Those idea of if we live the values that were espoused in that excellent short video we looked at earlier this morning, then would they be applicable to all communities, or would we need to align them in relation to different types of communities? I don't know the answer to that.
I'm sitting here. Sorry, Nikki. I'm sitting here hesitating about the language to be used, because I think the difficulty that we're experiencing is about the language we want to use. I think we're all we can all recognise what we want to see happen, but at some point it's almost like a flag to the mast. What standards are we wanting to uphold, and how would they be done, in order to be ethically robust? Yeah, I'm perhaps not being very clear, but yeah, I have to give this some thought.
I think Helen just put a really good point in the chat. Are we ethics practitioners, or are we ethical practitioners? Because I think those two things are not the same.
Gosh, I hope I'm both. But I need to have a little bit of a rethink.
So,
but I think Hilary's question about can we produce a thing a code or a set of values or whatever it's going to end up being. What was that wonderful phrase you used earlier that we decided? Thoughtful messiness. We're going to create a code of thoughtful messiness. This came from the chat earlier. Can they be for all communities? Well, potentially, but then people will align themselves or not as they see fit. And if we sit here and create this code of thoughtful messiness, there will be researchers in other parts of the world who will look at that and think, well, that doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not going to have any truck with that. I'm going to go for this other code from this professional body that I'm aligned to, because that makes more sense. It would be nice to think that we could create something for all communities, but I don't think we can. I think we can create something for us, for our community, and start there, and then see what it might need doing to widen it out. That's just my thoughts, though. Other people may differ.
I would agree with you there, Helen. From the perspective of we need to start somewhere. Let's figure something out that works for us, and then get feedback and see how it can be amended to work for more people, with the understanding that something can never work for everyone, because ethics is by definition inherently linked to culture, to background, to values, and those things are always different for everyone. But we can aim for the most common denominators, I would say. Emily, sorry, Emily first, Janet second. Go.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful when there is like a kind of core set of values when an organisation or something else. So I kind of come from that different spectrum of like kind of voluntary sector work, and that idea of like, every time you work with a charity or voluntary sector organisation, we have like a bit of a mission statement, and you have those value statements, and sometimes that gets really like, oh God, just painful when you see like the NHS try and do it, or whoever try and do it, and they kind of set it out and you're like, oh gosh, and even like the colour and the branding like becomes painful. But there are some really great examples where organisations have done that, and it's not just a thing that's put on a website, but it's something that they start everything with. So like I do loads of work with the Co-Production Collective, who I put one of the links to the work they've done around ethics in the chat. And they've done some really good work on ethics, but even just aside of the work of ethics and co-production, they have, like, for example, just their values, their core values. I'll post an example of it in the chat in a minute, but it's really nice because it's just this is our way of working, and it doesn't mean that everybody that they work with has to subscribe to those values, but it's like this is what's important to us. And whenever I work with them, we begin every meeting by remembering and talking about those core values and what they mean. And it's things around being inclusive, embracing change, being transparent, being reflective, being kind, and all of those things that we would want in that sort of space. So I think it's really helpful when those things are really clearly laid out. And I think, like, so whoever it is that engages with it, it's really helpful when those things are clear. So I don't know, for example, being neurodiverse in some ways, I find it really easy, or much easier, to access information if I can see it. And when it's really clearly written and I hear it, that embeds it. And then like, there's all those different ways that people interact, and people need sometimes frameworks, and they need sometimes people like long papers, but actually it's really good to communicate things in different ways. I'll post an example of it in there, but I think it's really important to have those things without getting too lost in the definitions.
Janet.
It was only little, but it reminded me, I've put it in the chat that I'm having a lovely time typing in, but about capacity assessments. I don't know if you work in health, any of you, but in capacity assessment, you're working out if somebody has capacity, and the set principles, there's 4 questions that you always ask about, does somebody understand? Can they weigh up the pros and cons? Can they retain and can they communicate? They're quite easy to remember. But those 4 principles are always decision specific and time specific. And I think maybe I like what Emily's just said about setting the intent. And maybe the setting the intent is perhaps universal, but every research project is research specific and time specific, because it might change. And it just reminded me of that. So it's not like new hoops to jump or new boxes to tick, but these are really good value-based intention principles that then you have to apply in your own context. I was just wondering about that.
No, I think that makes sense, and there is definitely an overlap in scope, I guess. if we briefly then step back to the point where we said we need to start somewhere, and we need to make something that we can then talk to other people about. We are moving on to the third of our points, but I have amended it from the original one to remove the word code and to insert the word set of values, because we've kind of set on the fact that we'd like that terminology better. So how can we make a set of values useful across creative research methods? With the focus being across the community of creative research methods practitioners. As we said this morning, we are but a few representatives, and there are a few visual arts-based things, but creative research methods is a really broad thing. So how can we make a set of values that could be useful across the wider creative research methods community?
Nikki, I think some of it, sorry, go on, Harriet.
No, go. You beat Harriet to it briefly by half a second.
And Helen,
so if you go
like,
first,
I do apologise, ladies. I think this question relates very much to what was just been spoken about, that clarity, clarity of intent, of focus, and approach. Because if you've got those in place, and that then that your values will come.
Harriet.
As you asked that question, I was imagining myself sitting down and starting a new project and thinking about what tool would really, or tool or set of tools would really help me. If there were just a list of values, I think I might struggle with that. I mean, I'd make it work, but I think I would struggle with that. And if I think about undergraduates or postgraduates that eventually this might filter down to, they might be completely lost within that. So something that I personally would find it very useful is a kind of set of reflective questions. And I mean genuinely reflective, not just the kinds of questions that you get in an ethics form, that are sort of arranged around each of those values. I would find that really helpful. And I'm just thinking about, my previous experiences of undergraduate and postgraduates that just really struggle with the whole engaging with the ethics process.
Yeah, I think you may well be right, because obviously having a set of values is one thing, but being able to do something practical with the set of values is a second thing. So I'm glad it's not just me. Yes, Helen.
I think one key thing, it may seem very elementary, but I think one key thing is to write it in plain language. Whatever we write down that we think people are going to use, let's keep it simple. Oh, no, I've just copied the wrong link in the chat. Sorry, I've just been searching for a thing to make my point and the copy thing didn't work. Now copy it, you silly keyboard. Hold on, ignore that previous link. We've done that one already. There we go. Here is an example of a contract for people doing work for other people. And it's really short and it's really simple and it works. And I think if you have a quick look at it from the link on the chat, you will get the idea. And I think whatever we produce could do with being in a similar vein. I mean, it perhaps doesn't have to be quite so laconic, but let's not get all tied up in academic-ese and definitions of this and that and the other and all of that. Let's just keep it straightforward. Let's make it something that people who have English as an additional language would find accessible.
Sorry, I'm just reading that document and I'm sitting here chuckling to myself because it's brilliant. But yes, clear, plain language is a really, really important thing, particularly when we start talking about values, because and this kind of goes back, I think, to what Emily referred to as well, the amount of times that values are written and worked with that are indeed painful to read, because what in the world are these people actually talking about? Having something sensible that we can build on, that we can work with in practice, that is set on a set of values in plain language, I mean, that should be the absolute baseline minimum. Because if people don't understand what we mean, then how can they work with it? We got any more comments or points on how we're going to go about making that set of values in the first instance, so we can spin off from that?
It strikes me that today we've had such an interesting, in-depth, detailed discussion. It's been brilliant. But we've got examples of a lot of this stuff out there. And maybe we don't need to reinvent the wheel from the beginning here. I think what we need to do is do a good, thorough understanding of what's out there. And I think again, Helen, you brought this in, that statement of "I'm not from academia." There's a fresh perspective here. And that's what I want to embrace, this fresh perspective, knowing that this stuff is already out there, but I need to understand what that is. And importantly, how that can help us make sense of doing this ethics of thoughtful messiness, if you like, but doing it with each other. And with each other, our meaning, our research communities, our research populations, our research participants as well. So we don't need separate questions. We don't need separate. We just need to have those simple questions, as you've identified, Helen, that we can sit down and have a discussion together of what might this mean to you, or what does this mean to me as the researcher? What does it mean to you as a potential participant? And I think it's the conversation and that understanding of what that means that's important, as opposed to an assumption. There's an understanding on both sides.
Yeah.
I think we should reinvent the meal, Janet.
I just read that and it's like, now I'm hungry.
Oops. I ain't an academic either.
I guess that's
yeah,
why
go for Jackie.
I was going to say that's why I came up with this notion of thoughtful messiness, because there is so much out there, and qualitative research can be really quite messy, and it's about trying to bring some clarity to what it is that we're doing. It's a play on words, but it just is.
I think you get nothing but agreement from us here. I think that so far we're kind of been slowly but surely steering towards the next question, because we're moving into what this could look like. But we've also today touched on real world ethics and ethics of doing research in the real world. So how can we incorporate the fluidity and adaptability of real world ethics into a set of values? I mean, how do we allow for that adaptability and fluidity so that whatever we come up with is relevant for the real world, with the understanding that the real world can be messy?
I wonder if part of this is about dropping some of the boundaries that we like to hold, like dropping the boundary between research and the rest of our lives, because research is actually part of our lives. It's not a separate thing. We do this with other things too. We do it with holidays. Like holidays are some kind of separate sort of sacred bit of time out of time, but they're not. They're real. People on holiday get grumpy and fall over and bang their knees and have a bad day, just like you might do in the workplace. And in the workplace, you can have a really good day, and so you can on holiday. We need to use words and these kinds of concepts to communicate about stuff. But one of the problems with human language, I think, is that it kind of isolates and categorizes beyond what's actually useful. And this perhaps also applies to how, as a species, our senses function and which are predominant. So, for example, I think one of the reasons we probably talked a lot today about visual methods, Jackie explicitly, Harriet a bit less explicitly, but your methods were very visual, is because we're so sight reliant as a species. We're massively reliant on sight until we develop visual impairments, and then we figure out what else to do. But it's, it's very, these things shape and color how we work with and in the world. And we've overdone the boundary thing in recent decades and centuries. You know, we talk about the silo mentality, etc., etc. And I think one thing creative methods certainly does extremely well is crosses boundaries, spans, transcends, whatever word you want to use. And therefore, I think whatever kind of ethics approach we take needs to do that too. And perhaps some of the values that we need to include are things like maybe we reconfigure things like adaptability and flexibility as values that we care about and that matter to us. Perhaps that's part of what we need to do here.
Does any of the other panel members want to contribute to that or add on to that? Oh. Yes, Harriet.
I think just to say thank you, Helen, for that observation, and the way that we use that notion of real world as if there's a kind of, when we talk about ethics, we're actually talking about an artificial world as opposed to a real world. And as Helen said, the two things are the same. I think perhaps what we might be talking about is not real world ethics, it's practices, possibly. And those are going to be context specific. There might be some general common things across the piece, but they're going to be largely context specific, I think.
Yeah. Jackie, Hilary?
For me, the key part there is the statement of the boundaries as being overdone. I think you're right, and I'm intrigued to tap into why that is the case and why that is being perpetuated as well.
Yeah, I mean, is there such a boundary? Because we're talking about this, and I guess we're probably artificially through language creating this dichotomy between real world ethics and academic ivory tower ethics, but surely it's a spectrum rather than a dichotomy. And surely it depends on research purpose, research context, and participants, all those elements that we talk about in applications and that we talk about in doing research. All those elements will put a project or an undertaking somewhere on that spectrum.
I think there's something more here about. Jackie's go on, sorry.
No. I'm just gonna jump into Emily's post, because there's something in this that you just have to see, and it probably relates back to conversations at the start this afternoon. We said about the NTRM being a bit tricksy, a bit punked, as Harriet and I like to call it. If you click on that, there's a little thing that says about Banksy. Emily, it's brilliant. It's got speak softly but carry a big can of paint, and I think there's something in what he does that perhaps we need to replicate, because he's used, we know he's an amazing artist, whether you like his work or not, but it's the fact that he's taken something that we know and made it available to anybody that can see it. And he's transferred it across many different platforms, and maybe that's where we need to start, with that sense of, that back to the joy. We're doing this for a purpose. We like it, otherwise we wouldn't be doing it. We want to know that what we're doing is good and it has value. But is there a way in which we can Banksy up this code of ethics?
I like the guerrillification of research ethics. We're going to run up to a university building somewhere and splatter something on the wall. That'd
be great. Oh, great. It's not my fault, Nikki.
Well, you're going to be the instigator now. You've put the idea in my head.
Thanks, Emily. That's brilliant.
I like it. But this is where these kind of events with people from a million different backgrounds come up with some very surprising nuggets of valuable information and thought. I'm just having a quick look at the chat to see where we're coming in. I'll hold your coat, of course. Oh God, now I'm off track. Thanks, guys. I was doing so well. Right, I've completely lost the plot now, so we're going back to my cheat sheet because this is not going anywhere.
Nikki, just
Yeah.
right, so I'm just looking at time. We haven't got much long left.
No.
Is there any questions from the audience you'd particularly like to hear? The views from Helen,
definitely.
Jackie, or Harriet on Note, just taking myself out of that equation.
Well, Janet just put something in the chat, and it was something that I was wondering, and it builds back a little bit on what we said earlier. Have others already established a code of ethics in creative methods? And I love this, how to cluster people together, like the participatory people. Those weirdos in
They
the
were
corner
who's
over there.
no. I'm a participatory person, but I think it was Emily was talking about it. There seems to be loads of great work where and there's loads of work with youth, with communities, with people who are not at all academics and not at all necessarily using words as their first means of communication. And Emily referred to some really great work already, and I just wondered if they'd already established the participatory people, you know, the ones who like normal folk to join in. I just wondered if they'd already done this, so that we're like not reinventing the meal, obviously. So, you know, can we just join with them rather than? I just wondered.
Yeah.
There are
There's loads of great. So the link that I put in there, that's just one organisation, but there's loads of organisations that I work with that's all based on co-production, most of it in health and social care, but it doesn't have to solely be. But there's loads of stuff that is going on and that has been happening. And I think it is about bringing those kind of things together, and also because of the links that those organisations have. So I do loads of work with the co-production collective, but because the co-production collective does that, it involves people and co-producing, they already have those really strong links and really strong relationships and trust with a lot of organisations and individuals that wouldn't necessarily be involved in another space. Or if we or another organisation were to say, oh, we're going to do this, they wouldn't even think that that's a space that they would want to step into or may even be known to be invited. So I think it's working together with organisations like that. And I think I put in the chat as well, there's a whole piece of work that was done really recently, I think it was last year, about ethics, and that was co-produced by the co-production collective. So that's co-produced with primarily like people, service users, and really diverse kind of experiences. And I think it's really important to bring all those things together because it really grounds it, and then it helps like people that are in one sphere really understand the sphere of somebody else, and help us think about how we build bridges across them.
Excellent.
Helen, is that a response to that before we move on to Charlotte? Sorry, you're muted. You've silenced yourself.
Rookie error. See, I've got so tired now, I can't even remember how to unmute. I can find to go after Charlotte, but I'm just putting my hand up to be in the queue because I still can't figure out this electronic hand thing. So.
No worries, mental note, you're in my queue. Charlotte.
Sorry, I've now got distracted by electronic hands. My question is kind of a comment and an extension of what Emily was just saying, in that, and it's a bit of a plea, if you like, because how do we not reinvent the wheel, and how do we pull everything that's all together? And I think creative methods is gaining traction in a lot of areas. It's not just in social sciences, it's making its way into lots of different spaces. But one of the things that has ensured an ethical practice, or what I like to believe is an ethical practice, is by speaking with other researchers that are doing it. So in terms of having a pledge to participants, that was something that came from Sharon Smith's work and the way that she's done conversation as part of her practice. And then thinking about aftercare is something that Philippa Isom's big part of in her storytelling in New Zealand, and she talks a lot about Aotearoa and the practices of the Maori people, and all of those things have come from the relationships that we have with other researchers. And now today I have been on such a high. I have had more fun today than I think I have had in a long time, and that has included being weed on and not having anything hot to eat. So I think in terms of having these spaces, and again, the NTRM has been a fantastic space, and it's just been joyful. And I've got this real not anxiety, but almost like dread that this is going to end in 13 minutes and I'm going to just sit here and then go, oh, it's done, when's my next fix coming, where can I get my next fix from? And so I think the question is one of the best approaches to ethical practice is to be held accountable to other ethical practitioners. And Helen, you said, although I was at traffic lights when you said it, you know, good people do bad things, and by reverse, bad people have done good things. And I think having that network of other people with very strong ethical principles is important. So how do we find other people that do that and can keep this momentum going, and that eventually maybe we will form a ethics panel that actually does pay attention to different things that are a little bit more adaptable, let's say. And I guess that's it. How do we find one another, and how do we almost find the newbies as well that are coming into this field and don't have the networks and contacts that other people do? So like Emily, I'm stealing all of your links today. But it's how, you know, I can't, I'm also tired and I'm getting to a point where I can't speak, so I'll leave it there.
No problem at all. And I think Helen may well have answers to some of those how do we move on with finding other people questions, because I have joined your merry band. So
you haven't you?
I have, yes.
I think, I mean, one thing to say is that I'm being asked to do this sort of thing quite a lot at the minute. And what I'm getting a sense of is a very generalized dissatisfaction with the way research ethics is managed, and a real sort of look, let's do it ourselves, we can do it better, or at least we can do it better for our people, which rather fights against my disinclination to uphold existing boundaries. But I think what we're trying to do is find our community across boundaries rather than within boundaries. And it's not surprising to me that this stemmed from the Grounded Theory Network, because again, Grounded Theory is used right across a whole bunch of disciplines, including some you really wouldn't expect. I don't need to tell you about that, you know about it already. And I think in terms of, I mean, I think let's keep on thinking, but I wonder if we can do something a bit more, dare I say it, creative than even a statement of values or a code of ethics, whether there's a way we can do ethics more. We started with this about the ethics of doing research creatively, but I wonder if we've actually come full circle with that, and we're now looking at how can we do ethics more creatively, which is the same thing upside down in a way. And that would certainly not involve codifying things, but we need to do something, and it needs to not, you know, anyway. So I don't have answers. I'm sorry, Charlotte, I wish I did. Sorry, Nikki. Sorry, everybody. But I have a whole lot of small questions I can keep asking, like we all do. But we do need to figure out something about next steps. Fortunately, that's not my job. Handing you over to MC Nikki.
That is indeed my job, or at least I say my job. I'm speaking in the plural sense here because my, in this case, indicates me, Hilary, Janet, Tom, and anyone else who would like to play. We like having friends, and therefore watch this space for the time being. We have kind of reached the end of the allocated time for the panel discussion. Having a quick check, but I think the chat is kind of running as it should. There's lots of useful information there. So I think we're kind of up to date, which brings me to start bringing today to an end. My first big thing will be, can I please extend a massive thank you to Helen, Jackie and Harriet for your incredibly inspiring stuff today. It's been a whirlwind for some of us. It's been particularly inspiring for all of us. I think everyone is going to go home or is already at home, but might go to the sofa needing a glass of something nice to start mulling. And there will be much mulling happening moving forward by a lot of people. On that note, if your mullings take you to wanting to reach out, please do. I will make sure that after today, I'll be a good boy and I will actually circulate everything that I need to circulate. In there will also be contact details for the organizing group. Please do get in touch. As I said, we'd like to make friends and we need to keep working on this. We need to do more with this. There is some momentum. The fact that we had a good 30 odd people here at some point today before people started heading off on other commitments means that this is obviously something that a lot of people are interested in. So let's keep talking. It will take a bit of time to get everything together, but there will be an after event communication coming out with further details. Also, a thank you to everyone who came today. It has been a full day of brain capacity, but I hope it was particularly useful, and I hope that you've had a good day. But going by what the chat has been doing throughout the whole day, I think everyone had a good time and everyone learned something new. Yeah, we learn all the things. Hilary.
Yeah, just to say, thanks to ARU that provided funding to run these 2 workshops.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think what we need to do is to go back with our begging bowls, as one does, to see what we can keep developing from this. Now, obviously, there's no promises and all that kind of thing, but I think from our perspective, we're definitely going to go back to see if we can continue and generate more funding from this, and from that we can keep taking this discussion forward, because I think that full circle that you identify, Helen, is quite important. I think there's a number of jobs to do. One, look at the stuff that's already out there that's really useful and is already doing really good work that can help us. But 2, it is understanding this creative ethics aspect as well. So from my perspective, it's application form hunting, and
yes.
And watch this space, and hopefully we will be able to put on future events.
Yeah, exactly. So as we said when we started, there is absolutely the outcome. Part of the outcome of this will be that there will be some reporting done and potentially a paper done on the outcomes of today. There will be further applications for funding to do more of this stuff and different things related to this. Just as a last bit of I guess housekeeping then, before we close at on the dot 4 o'clock, if I can, I'd like to just notify or let everyone know that the next event organized by the ARU Grounded Theory Network will be an online seminar on coding, which will be on the 4th of July. I'd also like to highlight that the Grounded ARU GT Network has a podcast called Grounded Theory Unbound, which is available on all the major platforms. And we have a YouTube channel where a lot of these recordings are made available, including the one from the discussion panel. A very not so unashamed plug for our Scottish friends, because they have their Scottish Grounded Theory Symposium on the 14th of June. And if I'm not mistaken, Susie, you are still here. I had not forgotten about you. The plug was already there, but I saw you plugged yourself earlier as well. So we have friends up north who are doing a very interesting symposium on all things grounded theory. Then I just picked something up in the chat. There was another plug that I will call out if I can find it, because the chat is being absolutely mental at the moment. I think it was the Non-Traditional Research Network plug for your regular meetings. Can someone rescue me, please? Because I can't find the...
It's NTRM at northampton.ac.uk.
Excellent.
It was on at 15:50 if you want to scroll up.
Oh, perfect. Is there an event in the diary for NTRM, and when is the next event?
It'll be in June, but we're still working to finalise
Okay.
our speakers and dates and things like that.
Can't be
you
the
happy to-
14th. Can't be the 14th because we're all in Scotland. So just
Right,
you know,
okay.
just thought I'd mention.
Noted.
Guys, are you happy to share that email address with delegates in this group?
Yeah.
Cool.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So on that
that's
note,
good.
I think that's all the plugs done. Unless anyone is particularly adverse to it, I will contact everyone on the attendee list with the follow-up email on these.
Helen,
Sorry,
you need a
Helen.
PA. You need a PA to sort out your admin.
A plug, a follow-up or email will follow to everyone using the contact details that are in the list. And that leaves me to say a thank you and goodbye, and enjoy the rest of your evening. And I know that I will be awake for a while thinking all this stuff over. So if
Nikki,
anyone wants to stay behind,
thank you for your emceeing
great
and keeping
sharing.
us on time. Janet, thank you for everything you do in the background and for nurturing and looking after us as you always do. Can I just ask Helen, Jackie and Harriet just to hang on for a few hours when we everybody else has left to get on with their day and stretch their legs and
Yeah, brilliant.
Thank you so much.
Good
Best day.